Welcome back to...
Brr. Oh. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Okay. Welcome back to the Megatherium Club podcast. This episode will be our first full episode for the year of 2025. I know it is technically the second one we recorded, but in my mind, this is where we are starting for the year, since that last one was kind of a recap for the previous year. Spencer.
Also, I got COVID, so that kind of delayed everything, and I couldn't talk very well without coughing every 2 minutes. So, obviously good now, but I'll take the blame on that one.
You got COVID 25?
I got COVID 25.
Oh my gosh.
It sucked. It really did. I've gotten every single booster shot, and it was still pretty brutal. Who's to say what it would have been if I wouldn't have gotten those shots? Yeah. But it is what it is.
Did you lose your taste?
I didn't. Well, kind of. So I didn't lose my smell or taste, except for this one thing at work. So at work, one of the chemicals we use to essentially fix DNA in place is acetic acid, which is the active ingredient you might find in vinegar. Whereas it's like 3% in vinegar mixed with other perfumes or whatever. The stuff we use is 100% acetic acid, so it's very toxic. And obviously has a very strong smell. I hate the smell of vinegar, so you can imagine how much I dislike the smell of this stuff. But when I was at work, I was maybe day 4 in, and I felt okay enough to go in. I shouldn't have gone in. That was a bad idea. But I was pouring this thing, and I was getting ready for that smell to hit me, and it hit me, and it smelled sweet in a way. It smelled really different to the point where I was like, oh my God, I just poured in the wrong stuff. No, it was acetic acid. And then I was like, okay. Up to that point, I thought I had the stomach flu. But I was like, I think I might have COVID. Took a couple COVID tests, and it came up positive. So, yeah.
Dang.
But nothing else changed, just that smell, which was very strange. It's now back to being normal, and I'm a little sad about it.
Oh, I thought you were like, it's now back. I have COVID again.
Oh, God, no, please, no. Oh, never again.
Gross.
So, anyway, yes.
Do you have any goals for this year or for the podcast?
Goals. I think for the podcast, I want to continue to, obviously do it, but just to continue to grow our audience, and however that might be. I had an idea to do something for our podcast for the TikTok ban, but I didn't realize they were going to ban it at, I don't know, mine stopped working at like 10 p.m. or something like that. And I was going to upload a video kind of like in the last hour, but I was like, oh, right. We're not in the time zone that they probably shut everything down. It's probably midnight there or whatever. So I didn't get to do anything. It wouldn't have done anything anyway, because the ban only lasted for a couple of hours, really. We all went to bed and woke up and it was back.
Yep.
I'm not thanking Donald Trump for that. I'm not thanking the CEO of TikTok for that. It was all propaganda. Oh, God. I hated seeing Trump's name when I opened up the app.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens. Also, Trump was like the first person to call for its ban in 2020. So,
Funny how that works.
Funny how that works. Too much to talk about there. So, but I had some goals. I have some goals for the future for, maybe TikTok. If that continues to stay around or whatever, we'll figure it out.
Cool.
So kind of growing the podcast through those methodologies.
I like that.
Yeah.
I too would like to see the podcast grow, of course. It has been cool to see where people in the world are listening to us from. I would like to have more interaction with our listeners. I would like that. I think with the idea of growing on social media like that, the opportunity is there. We just need to take a hold of it. And we do this because we enjoy it, sharing scientific information with the public, and it is a way for you and I to stay connected in spite of living so far apart. So I would like to see more episodes come out of 2025 and 2024. I think we hit 17. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right.
17. We late in the year we kind of set a goal of 20. Didn't quite get that, and that's totally okay. But I am proud that we got more than one out a month average.
Yeah.
While working full-time jobs and dealing with the other regular inconveniences of life.
That's exactly right. So, yep. I think 2025 is going to be a good year for us. And obviously, we want more engagement with the people that actually listen to us. Yes. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Like, yeah,
Hi, Mom.
you give us some cool ideas. But if you're not our mom, our dad, or our family members, and you're just some random person that happened to come across and you maybe like our podcast enough to keep listening, please reach out to us. megatheriumclubpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to actually hear from some folks. Ideas you want us to talk about, corrections you have for us, additions you have for us, whatever. We want to get to know some of the people that are listening
Collaborations,
to us. So,
maybe?
Collaborations, I was going to say.
Oh, you were going
to. So, yeah. Let's see what 2025 has in store for us.
Well, today's episode, it is winter here in the northern hemisphere, and hopefully all those that live in the higher latitudes are keeping warm as we enter the coldest parts of the year.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, are you guys getting hit with this kind of polar blast vortex?
Yeah, I know we're in North Carolina, and last year, I was just talking about this with my wife and mother-in-law, where I didn't bust out what I'd truly say is my winter coat last year, and we didn't see snow last year, but it's been in the 20s consistently when I wake up and go to work, and so I have put on my heavy coat, and we've seen snow, and it's stuck around. We see ice. Like, didn't feel like a true Midwest winter this year like I'm used to, but it was a winter, and I think we're going to see those temperatures drop tonight and this coming week for that Arctic blast or whatever. How about you?
It's been cold. We got up to almost 45 on Friday.
Ooh, that's balmy.
And then the next day it dropped about 40 degrees and it's continually dropped. I think yesterday and today it's been below 0 Fahrenheit with wind chill bringing that down to feeling like -20 or whatever.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I cannot complain then.
So I didn't know how far reaching it went into the south.
Yeah.
I was kind of looking at some of the weather maps, and obviously places more north of where I'm at are even more brutally cold.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously just stay inside if you can. Dress appropriately if you're going to go outside. So
I guess I can be thankful that I can, every now and then I'm still running in shorts.
Ah, there you go.
I'm like, oh, it's only 50 degrees today? That's a shorts day. But I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm a little spoiled now living in the South.
You know, you live in the South. I live in a house that has central heating.
Uh-huh.
What about those things outside that don't have that?
That's true. One theme that comes to a lot of people's minds when you think about winter is hibernation. They don't want to deal with the winter. They hide away from it for a bit. And we all grew up being taught that bears spend their winters in caves sleeping. They hibernate until spring. But what is hibernation? Hibernation is a state of minimal activity, a metabolic depression characterized by a low body temperature, slow breathing, and a slow heart rate. This is often a strategy, like I said, to pass through winter. Traditionally, hibernation is used to describe how animals like rodents survive winters, and bears do not fit the traditional definition of hibernation from what I've read. In rodents, such as hedgehogs, ground squirrels, their body temperature will drop to near ambient temperatures in addition to their much lower heart rate and respiration rate. So that traditional hibernation included the lowering of a body temperature to near ambient levels. And they're not ambient as in like -20. They're usually like in the soil, under some snow where it's cold, but it's not they're not dead. They're not an icicle down there.
Yeah.
They haven't frozen to death. They do come back alive. But bears do not see this dramatic drop in their body temperature, as theirs only drops about 3 to 5 degrees Celsius compared to well over 30-degree drop in rodents. There has been scientific debate on whether or not bears hibernate, but the term hibernation has evolved to include these animals and others. So it's now like kind of like an umbrella term. Some animals experience something called torpor, and that's kind of under this hibernation umbrella now. And hibernation is considered voluntary to conserve energy and face the winter months, often triggered by environmental conditions. Torpor, not what we think about in Ark, kind of, but
Kind of.
torpor appears to be more involuntary, as conditions dictate when the animals enter the lower body temperature, breathing, heart rate, and metabolic state. Torpor is often for much shorter periods of time compared to a deep hibernation, and some animals that experience this include bats, reptiles, some rodents, and even birds like hummingbirds. But Spencer, is there something that I'm missing here? Is there another similar strategy that another group of organisms might use?
Yeah, there's two more.
Oh.
Yeah. So let's talk about one. So you talked about hibernation, torpor. Well, okay. Actually, before we dive into mine, I want to add, I don't know if we've talked about this in the podcast before. I feel like we have, but in case you didn't listen to that episode or I'm completely lying. You've heard of the white nose syndrome that bats get?
Yeah.
So I learned, this was a couple years ago, but I was listening to probably to NPR or something like that, and I had heard about this fungus that spreads from bat populations and just completely decimates them, and it's why we see less and less bats, and many bat species are endangered because of it and other reasons. But I guess I never really understood the mechanism of what the heck is happening. I thought it was just like this fungus that kills them, right? Like infects their brain or something. No, it's almost sadder. So they get this white nose fungus, and it literally grows in areas like their nose or other places. And it's kind of constantly there, and it's not really a problem in the summer. It becomes a problem when these bats enter their torpor stages in winter, because to get your metabolism to slow down, it takes a lot, ironically, it takes a lot of time and and energy in order to start to change your body into that state. And when the bats are in torpor, they want to maintain that torpor state, because then they're not burning calories by having a higher metabolism, moving around and stuff like that. However, this fungus makes them itchy and they will come out of torpor to scratch their body and to scratch their faces, and then they can't go back into torpor fast enough, and they literally starve to death. It's super sad.
That's awful.
Yeah. So, if you're in an area that has white nose fungus, don't go caving. If you have bats in your house or whatever, make sure you call people that are going to do the right thing and to protect the bats that are there and to get them out of your house or whatever. Obviously, you don't want bats in your house, but...
Can I tell a story real quick?
Oh, of course, yeah.
I don't think my ex listens to this, so that's fine. We were broken up at this time, not getting along, but she did call me saying that she was in her house, lake house, and there was a bat flying around, and her parents would not come help her. And so I drove 3 hours because the last bat that flew into one of her parents' houses was killed, and I honestly think it was one of the endangered brown bats. And so I drove for 3 hours up there and rescued this bat. I don't know its exact species. So when you said call the right person, I was like, that was me. But no, don't call me now.
Don't call me now. I will call you, and then you'll have a really long drive.
Yes.
to help me. Yeah. No. Congratulations. That's amazing. I love bats. They're so underrated.
They're so
People
cute.
think they're just creepy and gross. They're just so cute. I don't understand. Also, they're like the most diverse group of mammals because flight is really, really good. So weird how that works. But anyway,
we have it. Not we. I think it was in the museum in Virginia we went to. They had a dino festival, so we had to go, of course. And they had like they're not real, like molds or replicas of, it was like a dozen different bat faces. And so you could get up close with these things and just see all these different faces. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of variety in bats. And I think it's, like you said, kind of underestimated. Everybody thinks of a bat, and you probably can name fruit bat, vampire bat, and you're probably done. There's way more to them than that.
Yeah, they're incredible. Anyway, thanks for letting me kind of go off on that little tangent there. I thought that was kind of interesting, and it definitely ties into what you were talking about. So
yeah,
but there are obviously more than just mammals out there that are living in areas that get cold. There are also things like amphibians and reptiles. We've talked a little bit about amphibians and what some amphibians can do to survive these cold temperatures. We have a whole episode on that. Not a whole episode, part of an episode on that. I don't remember what that one's called. Well, you're just going to have to listen to them all to figure out which one
it was. The Halloween episode, the undead or something.
Oh, it was. It was the Halloween episode, yeah. Okay, well, there you go. There's something to go off of. I couldn't remember when we did that one. But anyway, but let's focus maybe a little bit more on reptiles. So, brumation. It's hibernation's kind of reptilian cousins. And brumation is more like hitting almost the slow motion button. Now, when you compare brumation to hibernation or torpor, they're all very, very similar, which is why a lot of people kind of use the terms kind of interchangeably. But there are some kind of slight differences. But in general, brumation, just like hibernation, in animals, metabolism slows, their temperature, well, with reptiles, they're ectotherms, so they're already at whatever the temperature is outside, unless if they're like sunning or whatever. Their body temperature usually matches what's outside. And so they don't really lower their body temperature, but it just is lowered for them in a way, if you get what I'm saying. And so let's give a couple specific examples here. Turtles. There's been some videos, I think, going around of snapping turtles like underneath the ice, and people are kind of walking across the lake and they look down and you can see these snapping turtles just chilling, and they're like, well, what the heck? Are those dead? No, they're not dead. They're just in brumation. These animals that live in the water, like turtles, they still have to breathe air just like every other animal that is not a fish, right? But they don't necessarily need to come up for air all the time. In summer, yeah, they'll come up. You can see their little nose sticking up above the water, and then they'll swim back down. But they don't have that luxury in winter because everything's frozen over. Some turtles might dig down into the mud and be literally under the ground for that much amount of time. But other ones, they will go down to a deep part of a pond or a lake where the water isn't freezing, so the water temperature is warmer. Usually, the deeper you kind of go in winter, and they'll just kind of hang out down there. Their metabolisms will slow. They don't eat. They don't really even move. They can kind of move around a little bit, but they're not going to really need to. And so their oxygen needs plummet. But it doesn't plummet to zero. They still need oxygen in order to survive the entire winter. So how the hell do they do this? If they can't come up for air, they do this thing called cloacal respiration.
Ooh, breathing
so they
through their
breathe
booties.
Essentially through their butts. Now, it's not just through their butts, but it's through their skin, specifically their tails. And there's a lot of blood vessels that go throughout their tail and kind of that area of their body. And just like the gills on a fish pull oxygen from the water and put it directly to the bloodstream, they're doing this with their like skin. So they're breathing through their skin, but because their metabolisms are so low, they're not using up a whole lot of oxygen, and the carbon dioxide doesn't build up fast enough, in order to poison them, or they don't have a lack of oxygen to kill them. They just don't move, and they get enough oxygen just through that. And there's enough water flowing through there that kind of moves around a little bit that they'll get more oxygen when they need it. And that's what they do. And as the temperature warms up, they'll start to warm up, and eventually the ice breaks and they'll come up and be ready for summer. So those are turtles, painted turtles, common snapper turtles. Those are things that are specifically like meant to live in areas that will freeze over every year, right? Like the snapping turtles that I see up in the boundary waters in northern Minnesota. Yes, of course they're going to be under the water. But you're in the South. The South, like you said, can get pretty cold. It's rare, but it can. So as this polar vortex moves in, there are other creatures, other reptiles, reptilian-like things, that are going to be facing this cold that's coming up. Alligators. So alligators, they don't have cloacal breathing, so they can't just hang out in the bottom of a pond. They still have to breathe. So as the water starts to freeze, there's an instinct in alligators, and it's called icing. I don't know where that comes from. But essentially, as the ice forms, they will submerge themselves in the water, but then put their noses up above the water, and it will freeze. And their noses will be frozen just above the water. And you can see their body just laying perfectly still under there. So like the turtles, they're not moving. They don't want to move around because they want to keep their metabolism as slow as possible. But they still have to breathe air. So they will put their noses just above the water, and when it freezes, they can still breathe, which is absolutely incredible. They don't know how they exactly know how to do this. It's just like an instinct. But it's really cool. So look up pictures of alligators icing. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some icing alligator pictures popping up on TikTok or Instagram in the next couple of weeks as the temperatures plummet in some of these areas. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. That's kind of brumation in general. Now, when I worked at a zoo, I was in Kentucky. We had alligators, we had turtles, and we moved a lot of them into what we dubbed the hibernaculum, which is an actual term. So things like snakes, some turtles, they will go into this brumation, but they'll do it in a specific place, like an old hollowed out log or a little cave on the side of a cliff or something like that. And they will bunch up in a large group, which actually helps out any sort of heat retention or heat distribution, I should say, to keep all of their metabolisms about the same. It's why in spring you might see giant groups of snakes emerging from something. It's because they're all there brumating throughout the winter. But when I worked at the zoo, we did that for these reptiles. So we took all of the alligators, we put them into this insulated shed, and we put them in some water, and we essentially kept the temperature. We kept it at about 60 degrees, which is still pretty warm, right? But it was getting much colder outside, like below freezing. And they could have survived that, but we just kept them at that temperature so we could still like get them out and use them for various outreach programs and stuff, so that we weren't shocking them every time we were taking them in and out. But we weren't allowed to feed any of them because their metabolisms are slowed enough to the point where digestion isn't possible. Their bodies can literally not metabolize the stuff inside their body. So if they eat something like a hunk of meat and we put them in there, well, what's going to happen to that meat? It's just going to rot inside of their body, and then that will kill them. And so we had to make sure that we really paid attention to the temperatures outside because we didn't want to accidentally feed them and then all of a sudden have a temperature drop and then accidentally kill all of our animals because they had rotten meat just inside their bodies. So kind of interesting stuff. But there's another one. So we've talked about mammals. We've talked about a little bit about amphibians if you go back to our other episode. We talked about reptiles. Is there another group that we haven't talked about, Sean?
What about insects?
Oh, our areas, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's brumation, hibernation, torpor, and this interesting little thing that I'll give a quick shout out to, diapause. Yes, insects, not every insect just dies out in the winter. A lot of them do, but not all of them, because then there would just be nothing left come springtime. So at some point, something in an insect has to overwinter. And insects differ from, they don't hibernate because, and diapause is more, it's literally like a pause in a way. I mean, that's where it kind of comes from. But it happens in between distinctive cycles of an insect's life. And that's how it differs from something like hibernation, whereas an insect will likely overwinter or diapause in some sort of younger life stage of the insect's life, like pupation, for example. But that's not always the case. Some survive the winter as eggs. Some do survive them as adults. Just kind of depends on the insect. But most of them are through pupation stages, but not all. But that's the difference about it, because as the temperatures and more specifically the light changes in the fall, as our days get shorter, this triggers specific hormonal changes that essentially say, okay, this life stage that we're in now, we're putting a pause on it. Do not continue developing, because if you do, you will die. And it's certain specific phases of their life that can produce the antifreeze properties that allow them to overwinter and survive below freezing temperatures or whatever. Now, some insects might actually crawl under the ground. They will maybe be like in the fall, they may be in their last caterpillar stage or whatever. They'll crawl down into the soil, they'll dig down, and then they'll pupate and just wait out the winter as a pupal, and then finish pupation in the spring and emerge as an adult from the ground. Some insects do that. Others, they just literally grab onto the side of a tree or whatever and ride out the winter, ready to go. Now, insects, because they have lots and lots of babies, a lot of them still do die. But only some of them have to survive in order for their population to continue on in the spring. But yeah, that's kind of diapause, I guess, in the quickest fashion I could come up with. So I didn't want to drag it on. But
no, well, thank you. That was a great explanation.
Overwintering is one of my favorites. It's the second half of my master's thesis. It's just fascinating. I can't believe animals just evolved to be like, you know what? I'm not going to do anything for 4 months.
Screw the next.
And
yeah.
I really wish humans could do this.
I think a lot of people wish we could do this.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, we are considered tropical species, so we are not allowed to hibernate. But there are, like, towns and other places in the very northern latitudes that do almost do a hibernation type of behavior.
Oh, yeah.
Where they kind of basically shut down the town for an entire month during the coldest and longest part of the winter, where the sun doesn't come up or whatever, and it's just dark all the time, and they simply just wait it out. And I mean, humans can adapt to different sleep cycles, and they will actually, sleep longer than what other people are sleeping. Like, we're kind of used to this 8-hour, 16-hour
cycle,
kind of wake life cycle. But studies have shown that if you don't have light in order to calculate your circadian rhythm. For example, they did these studies in caves where they just put these people in caves and said, okay, we'll see ya. And they ended up sleeping for basically, I think they were on a 36-hour circadian rhythm.
Oh, wow.
Instead of 24 hours. I was thinking about animals that don't hibernate.
Oh, okay.
And specifically thinking about, okay, not every animal goes to sleep and just waits out the winter, even though you might think they are. Specifically, I've studied northern red squirrels, and they are active all year, no matter what is going on outside. And these are small squirrels. They're smaller than the squirrels, the gray or fox squirrels that you might have in your backyard. They live in the boreal forests, North America. And yeah, they're kind of these small, cute little red squirrels, I guess. They'll run around up above the snow. They'll also have tunnels underneath the snow. And that's just kind of what they do all winter. But they're constantly eating. And so their whole job during the summer is to cache as many, specifically the ones that I was studying, spruce cones. And we're talking thousands and thousands of cones within these caches.
Huh.
And these caches will usually be in a log underneath the snow to kind of protect them from other squirrels, really. But that's what they do. They'll just kind of run around. They'll keep gathering them throughout the winter, cache more, and then when they get hungry, they'll grab them and they'll eat them and keep going. And other animals are also super active. When I was up in the Yukon, I had these snowshoeing trails that we created throughout the kind of grid that I was working on. And they're kind of these packed down areas in the snow. I mean, the snow is like 4 to 6 feet thick. Dang. Up there. And so, which is really good for the animals that are living up there. So not every animal, like the squirrels, they'll run out, because they're living up in the trees. But most things, some of the mice, some of the voles, and some of the insectivores are kind of running underneath the snow. Every once in a while they'll pop up, just like this shrew that popped up in one of my trails. And it couldn't figure out a way to get back in until I literally found a hole for it and made the hole a little bit bigger, and then it was able to run in there. It did bite me. Oh, no. It's not a venomous shrew, so I didn't unfortunately get envenomated, which would have been cool in my honest opinion. But either way, I managed to throw it back onto the snow because I didn't want to, an owl or something to get it, because I was the one who accidentally forced it out of the snow, so I felt kind of bad for it. But what's incredible is even though these things aren't going into hibernation, they're still active underneath, and they form these literal highway systems of tunnels underneath the snow. And that's just because that's where, one, they're protected from predators. However, foxes and other animals have evolved to be able to listen to them underneath the snow. But more so, it's because if you are under even just like a foot of snow, in between the snow and the ground, the temperature can be steady all year round. Well, all winter long, not all year round, but all winter round, at around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is obviously above freezing. It's not warm, but it's not freezing. And that's because snow itself is an amazing insulator. It reflects a lot of that sunlight, and, well, you'd actually want it to keep some of that sunlight. So it's white, so it kind of reflects it, but it also keeps the cold out in a way, which is kind of cool. So I didn't have any specific examples of hibernation, but I was thinking about non-hibernation animals.
Gotcha. So that's pretty cool. I've seen some scientific illustrations recently of the different layers of the snow and the animals that live through that. So that's kind of cool that you talked about it. I wanted to talk about a unique hibernator. Hibernator? Is that a word? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
A unique animal that hibernates. There we go.
There you go.
This animal is known as the fat-tailed dwarf lemur, or Chirogalius medius, aka the lesser dwarf lemur, aka the western fat-tailed dwarf lemur, or aka the spiny forest dwarf lemur. I don't know. It has a lot of common names here, but It is endemic to Madagascar, as are all lemurs, right? Am I crazy there?
Yep. Yep.
Which means it can only be found in Madagascar. Regardless of the common name, they all have dwarf as part of it for a good reason. These little critters are only 8 to 9 inches from head to end of their torso and have a tail that's another 8 to 11 inches. So just under 2 feet in length and only weighs 4 to 10 ounces, which is less than a pound. And actually, that's less than half a pound for part of that range too. So very small little critters. And these lemurs are the only primates that experience some form of hibernation that we know of today. Primates include monkeys, gibbons, baboons, and the great apes like gorillas and chimpanzees. And yes, we are on that list too. And while some of us may go dormant during the winter, hiding from the cold temperatures, we don't actually enter a true state of dormancy like these dwarf lemurs. Our body temps don't lower, our metabolism may slow down from lack of activity, but not the level like these guys. And we are still shoving our faces full of food all winter long. Probably actually gaining weight during the winter, the opposite of what things normally do in hibernation. But back to the lemur. As the name suggests, they store fat in their tail that supplies their body with nourishment through their dormancy. You might have caught on and heard me say they live in Madagascar, and you're probably thinking, but does it get cold in Madagascar? The answer is no. It is it is a tropical area. So another part of this uniqueness is that you don't have to have a cold area to hibernate. The goal of hibernation is to avoid a period of either inclement weather, a less favorable environment, or a lack of resources, really. And so it is a tropical area, so the temperatures always are pretty high, so why do they need to hibernate for up to 7 months? They use this strategy to avoid the dry season. And so in the dry season, there's not only just less water, but less food. So they find a nice tree hole and sleep it out, waiting for the rain to return as well as their food resources. An interesting point that does make it fall under the traditional hibernation term, in my opinion, is that their body temperature relies on the ambient air temperature, and they do not regulate that themselves. If the tree they are sleeping in is not well insulated, then their temperature will fluctuate more alongside the outside temperature. So while they're not dropping, 30 degrees Celsius, they could fluctuate a few degrees just with the weather, as if they're not in a good tree hole. If they're in an insulated tree hole, they might just stay the same temperature pretty consistently or not vary as much. Their heart rate will drop from around 180 beats a minute to as low as 8 beats per minute.
Oh my gosh.
That's so few. Oh my gosh. These cute little lemurs also experience what is called interbout arousal episodes. So these are just periods of body activity that break up their hibernation or torpor. Their heart rate will increase, their breathing will go up, body temperature will rise, their sleep pattern will change, and then they'll go right back to sleep and enter that torpor mode, lowering all those body functions once again. They will not leave the tree, though, during these interbout arousal episodes. To me, that's kind of like a, oh shit, am I late to work? And then you fall back to sleep after the panic dissipates and you're not actually late to work yet. So it kind of reminds me, or the other night when I punched my wall thinking there was a bug on my face. To store energy for their hibernation periods, these fat-tailed lemurs eat a lot of fruits and flowers, as well as insects and small invertebrates. Their thick, with 2 C's, tail can reach up to 40% of their body weight by the time they enter their state of torpor or hibernation. Can you imagine crawling up a tree and you have to haul your large sack tail behind you? That nearly doubles your mass. I don't know. It's kind of funny to imagine. Like camels, they store some fat, but it's like on top of them, so it's like distributed over their mass. But
yeah,
these guys are literally hauling like a bag of fat behind them. I don't know. looking at it like that just sounds funny. If you haven't seen one of these, you should look it up. Oh my god, they're so adorable. I want one. It can hibernate in the pocket of a hoodie of mine for 7 months. I won't care. I will wear it every day. They are mostly gray with like a darker ring around their eyes and a white underbelly, little mouse ears, and their hands are finger-like. They're a primate. And like many animals in Madagascar, their big carnivores are the fossa. Fusa?
Yeah.
Which is like a giant weasel. I don't know if you've seen the movie Madagascar, but those are the crazy-looking crackheads chasing around the main crew.
Oh, yes. Yep.
The Fossa are attacking!
Did you watch that movie in preparation of the podcast?
No, but I want to watch it now. and see which, maybe one of them's a fat-tailed dwarf lemur. Maybe that little cutie that's always like getting picked on by the king. You know which one I'm talking about? Little pip.
Yeah.
That's got to be a dwarf lemur. Whether or not he has a fat tail, I'm not sure.
We're going to have to watch it to find out.
They also get preyed upon by birds of prey and snakes. But hiding in a tree does protect them from most predators, and they are actually capable of fighting off snakes to protect their young. Other cool facts I found are that they tend to be bonded and are monogamous, rearing young together and sleeping in the same tree hole. Though the female will occasionally mate with some other males other than her bonded half. Sounds like they like to sleep around. That was a bad joke. On a conservation scale, these animals are listed as vulnerable, so one step before endangered. Habitat loss and habitat fragmentation are their biggest threats, with deforestation spreading in the area. They are found only in the western dry deciduous forest of Madagascar, so a rather small area, and their population is anticipated to drop about 30% in the near future as more habitat is exploited. Kind of sad, but there's some efforts. I saw you can like adopt one online. I wasn't sure if those were like rescued ones or wild. Like you virtually adopt. You're not actually like, can I have one, please?
Right.
Send it here, Madagascar.
Amazing. Yeah. I wonder if it's like the sharks that you can get. You can track the lemurs or something.
It'd be really easy to track for about 7 months.
Yeah.
Yep, it's still in this tree.
It hasn't moved. Is it dead? We don't know. Amazing.
As a bonus, I did do a little bit of digging to see if I could find anything in the fossil record about hibernation, or if there's any signs of hibernation from millions of years ago. And I should have known it wouldn't take too long because there's a lot of research out there and people have already figured this out. But one of our last episodes, we briefly touched on an animal that lived in the Triassic period. If you remember, it's called a lystrosaur. And these lystrosauruses, or Lystrosaurus, is a genus of therapsids, so a distant relative to mammals and us. I had mentioned that they are some of the first animals to recover and spread after that great die-off mass extinction that led into the Triassic. They ranged in size, but were roughly the size of a pig. They're like a squat, reptile-looking creature that had a beak like a turtle and tusks like a boar and were herbivorous. I had also previously mentioned that they had survived the mass extinction living in Antarctica and then spread out from there, or so the theory suggests. While the Earth was much warmer then, living at the poles would require some adaptations when the weather changed or resources were sparse, so hibernation was apparently a strategy or something similar to it to wait out the bad periods. How do we know this, though? Paleontologists can look at the bones and measure their growth rate and stress throughout their life. Just like on a tree, there are rings deposited, like if you cut a bone, not in half, but circular cuts.
Yeah, I gotcha.
If you take cuts of a bone, you can see the circular rings deposited, kind of like a trunk of a tree, and such. These scientists were looking at their tusks, and you can see how the animal grows. And just like in the trees, you can look at when the animal is going through a stressed or a resource low time because the rings are close together. So they're not not growing a lot. You can compare these to the rings when they're spread out and the animal is experiencing a period of high growth. So these Listersaurs showed signs of seasonal periods where they at least were in a state of torpor with little to no growth, followed by periods of large growth and high activity. We can't say it was true hibernation, as we mentioned before, with a total reduction of metabolism and body temperature, but a form of hibernation nonetheless.
Right. I mean, it had to have evolved at some point.
Yeah. And maybe that helped them survive that mass extinction. If there were cosmic events or impacts and volcanoes erupting and the air was poison, well, if you were living underground for 6-7 months, maybe you could live through some of that.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah, hibernation.
Amazing. Hibernation, brumation, torpor, diapause, all great and good things.
Yes.
But I didn't know about that lemur thing, so that was a cool surprise for me. I've never really thought about hibernation in terms of dry or wet season, but that makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm a north creature, so cold and warm is is the general vibes I go for.
Yep.
So
there's our first one.
Thanks,
for
everybody.
2025.
Yeah, 2025. Good luck this year. Hope you keep listening to us. Send us a message. Like our what is it? Follow our podcast. Hit that
like button.
Ring bell thing. I don't know. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Support us if you want to. We would love that. Or not. You're likely an adult. You can make your own decisions. So, 2025. Cheers to you, buddy.
You too.
We're going to make this one a good one. So,
yes, sir.
How?
How?